So, you know when you start a project and you're like, oh yeah, I know a ton about this thing, it'll be so easy. But then you actually start researching it and you realize how much you actually don't know, and now you're curled up on the floor crying? Anyway, suffice to say, there was a lot more going on in Liyue than I thought there was, so here is my best attempt at a cohesive timeline. I think I've done a pretty good job, but if I make mistakes, please feel free to let me know. I do my best to pronounce the Chinese names correctly, but I definitely didn't always succeed. With all this being said, let's get into the history of Liyue. The first era seems to be the era of humans after the dragon sovereigns were first defeated by the primordial one. In this age, humans were prosperous and built great civilizations all over Teyvat. They wanted for nothing, and they were given everything they needed to have to survive by Celestia. Of course, as humans are wont to do, they grew tired of this existence, wishing to break away from the power that Celestia held over their lives, rebelling against the fate that had been assigned to them. This angered Celestia, who sent floods and rains to kill the newly formed humans in the world. When the floodwaters receded, newborn and surviving humans were little better than animals. Their knowledge and wisdom had been stripped away from them. Over time, the humans that had been born or survived the flood began congregating and creating civilizations under the leadership of gods. During this era, Liyue's main civilization can be found around what would become the Chasm. We don't know much about this civilization, but due to similar architecture and mythology, it's often assumed that the civilization had some relationship with Inkonomia. Whether they are the same civilization, splintered into two, or derivatives of each other is unknown. This part of Liyue's history is still somewhat vague and wrapped up in fairy tales and mythology. Because the nations we think of in the present day of Teyvat were not established, it makes it difficult to pinpoint specifics happening in each nation. But for now, the important things to remember from this are that Celestia held complete control over the lives of humans in Teyvat. This was after the first defeat of the Dragon Sovereigns, and that the lives of humanity were cyclical. Prosperous for a while, and then Celestia would destroy humanity and recreate them. The envoys of Celestia, the Four Shining Shades, lived among humanity to guide them to Celestia's will. Eventually, humanity rebelled, Celestia destroyed them in a flood, and the remaining humans, after the waters receded, began making civilizations with no knowledge of what had happened prior. There's a bit more to it than this, so if you guys are interested in a full deep dive, please let me know. The next era we know of is the Great War. The Great War was the second war that Celestia fought with the dragons. It's by this point that the second who came, who's likely the sustainer of heavenly principles, arrived in Teyvat. With the aid of the Sustainer, Celestia was able to repel Nibelung, the King of Dragons, ending the Dragon Sovereign's rule over Teyvat once and for all. During this time, Celestia is badly weakened, and many of the civilizations which had existed before are either destroyed by Skynails or are otherwise removed from Teyvat. It should be noted that Morax is truly 6,000 years old or more. He would have likely arrived in Teyvat around this time and seen the devastation firsthand. It's during this time of destruction that the solar chariot falls, creating the chasm. The civilization which lived there benefited from this fall, as it's implied to have made the chasm rich in natural resources. Beyond this piece, the accounts of what happened to the solar chariot differ, so we're going to leave that there. What we do know for certain is that the chasm was eventually hit with a skynail, which caused the people of this region to move to Chunyun Vale. The interim period has some conflicting information about the order things happen in. But we know this period took place before the Archon War. It should be noted that there were still many monsters and evil gods that prowled Liyue during this time, so there were still struggles for things like resources and territory, even if it wasn't an official Archon War. It's during this period that Morax began shaping portions of Liyue's landscapes, such as raising Mount Tiang, calming the seas, and creating Junyun Karst. The Guili Assembly is also likely formed before the official start of the Archon War. Guizhong approaches Morax and asks to join forces with him to protect the people of the Guili Plains. Morax agrees, and the assembly is formed. It should be noted that there were other gods a part of the assembly, such as the god of the stove, and that the Adepti also pledged themselves to the assembly. We should note that the formation of the assembly indicates that there was danger in Liyue during this time, even if the Archon War hadn't officially started. During the height of its power, the Assembly was a prosperous nation in its own right, full of engineering and technological advances. We also know that at some point while the Assembly was active, Khaenri'ah must have been established as well, because Guizhong had an interest in their technology. Additionally, Ganyu is born sometime during this period, as she does fight in the Archon War. Unfortunately, the good times cannot last, and so started the Archon War. The Archon War devastated Liyue. The fighting and bloodshed was significant, arguably the most intense of any nation, not including Natlan and Snezhnaya. Morax defended the people of the Guili Plains alongside Guizhong and the Adepti. At some point between this and the formation of the Yaksha, Morax found Xiao, but the exact dates aren't given. Morax defeats Xiao's master, and Xiao agrees to serve Morax. Morax formed the Yaksha, a group of powerful Adepti to help him subdue the evil gods present in the land. Unfortunately, evil cannot be stamped out so easily. During a fateful battle 3,700 years ago, Guizhong is killed, the Lord of Dust turning into the very thing she held dominion over, leaving her friends behind and causing the fall of the Guili Assembly. Morax holds immense guilt over being unable to save his friend and deciding that his contract to her is not fulfilled. He goes around collecting the people that had scattered during the fight and leads them to a safer place. This place is Liyue Harbor. Though the humans have a safe place to attempt to rebuild their society, Liyue as a whole is not safe, and Morax makes it his mission to ensure that none of the evil gods that threaten his people are allowed to live. So marks his bloody campaign against the various named and unnamed gods. He fights with an evil god dwelling in Shunyun Vale, causing the Bishui River to run red like blood. He fights the god Qi. After their battle, Morax seals Qi's body in 5 different places to prevent their resurrection. And, of course, he banishes Osile of the Vortex. During this time, Morax also answers the prayers of his people as much as he is able, and grants Ajdaha his sight in a higher level of consciousness. Marchosis, the god of the stove, uses the last of his power to protect Liyue against invading monsters, becoming a forgotten god. His epitaph as god of the stove is later attributed to Morax by the people in Liyue. And he goes to sleep in his temple, where he is later found in the present by Shangling. In this form, he has no memories of his past and limited cognitive abilities. And yet, characters describe Guoba as seeming happy and seeming to care for Shangling deeply. Liyue is devastated by plagues during this time as well, and a family of humans work alongside the Adepti to take care of the dead so that disease does not spread to the people. This family would become the same family that runs the Wangsheng funeral parlor, taking care of Liyue's dead for centuries into the future. It's also this time that the god of salt is killed by her own people for her weakness and inability to protect them. The survivors of her people end up in Liyue and establish the salt trade as one of the 8 trades of Liyue. Though the exact date that the Archon War came to a close in Liyue is uncertain, what is known is that this marks the end of most of Liyue's bloodshed. The Post-Archon War era is relatively peaceful. Morax still defeats monsters, but the fights are less frequent. With the evolution of humanity, many of the Adepti retreat back into Junyun Karst. More plagues are caused by the corruption of the dead and evil gods, and this kills many of the humans living in Liyue. The Yaksha also begin to go crazy, either disappearing or fighting amongst themselves and dying. Xiao and Bozacius remain the only Yaksha, and Xiao retreats to avoid contaminating the people of Liyue with his karma. Additionally, the Liyue Qixing is formed during this era as Liyue's humans become more independent of their Adepti and godly protectors, though the worship of Morax specifically is still highly ingrained in the people of Liyue Harbor. It's also close to the end of this era that Qiqi is killed while gathering herbs as the Adepti fight against a demon. She is then brought back to somewhat life by the Adepti who mourn the loss of a child so young. She goes insane from the Adeptal power in her body, and Mountain Shaper seals her in amber to protect her and the people around her. She stays there for hundreds of years until her eventual release. The final true conflict of this era is when Ajdaha begins to lose his mind and memories, eventually attacking the chasm. Morax, along with several Adepti, work to seal Ajdaha away, not wanting to kill his old friend. Before the start of the Cataclysm, Bozacius, sensing his deteriorating mental status, seeks to seal his treasure and be done with the world. Morax is approached by an unknown party, though very possibly the Traveler's sibling, shortly before the start of the Cataclysm, where he signs a contract. We know that he's not allowed to speak of what happened during the Cataclysm or give information on the sibling, but what Morax gained from the arrangement is unknown. As a side note, the wording here is a bit vague, so it's entirely possible this happened shortly after the Cataclysm, but I thought I'd include it here. Xiao becomes the last Yaksha officially, though he does not know of the fate that befell his brother-in-arms Bozacius. The Cataclysm in Liyue was centered mostly around the chasm and Dunyun ruins. Monsters and abyssal contamination poured into the chasm, and the Millilith and the Adepti are sent to fight. We do know Bosacius, after having forgotten most of his memories, is drawn to the chasm during the Cataclysm, where he fights to his death alongside one of Yelan's ancestors. It is in his final moments he remembers who he is, and that he was a protector of Liyue. What happened at Dunyun Ruins is apparently so horrific that none of the Adepti speak of what happened there, and none of the survivors that moved to Liyue Harbor ever speak of what happened to their homeland. Due to the after effects of the Cataclysm and the increase in monsters, a martial renaissance was established in Liyue, as many wanted to learn how to fight to defend their homes from monsters. This marks the most drastic departure from old Liyue. After the Cataclysm, the humans of Liyue become more and more self-reliant, worshipping and respecting the Adepti and Morax, but no longer wishing for their aid in every situation. Instead, the people of Liyue begin to work to defend their lands themselves and develop new technology. It's during this period a disaster befalls the village of Wuwang Hill, turning it into the desolate and ghost-ridden place that it is in the modern day. Chi-Chi is found by the Wangsheng funeral parlor, and they attempt to bury her, but she runs away, obviously, and is found by Baizhu, who agrees to take her in. The Qixing close the chasm due to numerous reasons, including accidents and strange happenings deep in the chasm. Tartaglia arrives in Liyue and obtains a sigil of permission, while also exposing a tax evader, leading to that person being jailed. Snezhnaya diplomats, what are you gonna do? And with that, we arrive at the events of the Liyue Archon quest. So there you have it, a complete timeline of Liyue's history all the way up to the modern day. When I tell you guys that this took forever and a day to research, I wasn't kidding. If you guys are interested in my sources, let me know and I'll make a pinned comment, but in the meantime, I stream Genshin at least once a week, though I try for twice a week. I will also be making a Notland recap and mini theory video, so whether I see you again or not, may the wind bless your travels.